I'm Ronald Wall. I'm from the IHS Erasmus University. I'm the head of Department of Urban Competitiveness and Resilience. The title of my presentation today is Global Economic Competitor. And the research I'm trying to show you today is trying to understand the relationship between economic globalization and spatial urbanization in the world system. So an important understanding in this project is to understand a city's position in global networks. This means that we need to tie the understanding of what happens within the boundaries of a city to the flows that actually take place between different cities in the world. Of course, you could look at different types of data, but a very important data nowadays to look at is foreign direct investment. And specifically nowadays, it's important to look at a special part of FDI called Greenfield Investment. And this is a very important type of FDI because it's project-based. So it's about the investments that big firms make into starting up new projects in cities. So this becomes very interesting because then you can measure the actual impact of foreign investment onto actual urban processes and development. So within this understanding, it's very important to use foreign direct investment because Greenfield FDI has become the primary indicator to measure any city's integration within the global economy. I'm going to show you in the process the actual structures of foreign investment between cities globally, and later on I'm going to specify more for Africa the position of African cities within the investment flows. Why is Africa very interesting? It's been shown in many researches that foreign investment is said to lead to economic growth. Not always, but in many cases it does. And foreign investment is a means to urge and to develop cities. It brings new technologies, new innovations, and if it's done properly, it also interacts with the local economy and local policy. And in that sense, doing it right would become very interesting for a kind of global, local, resilient process. Africa is in dire need of investment. In my research, I show that of all global investment, only 4% goes to Africa. And although there's a 6% growth rate in Africa, which is the highest of all regions, the actual volume of investment in Africa is still very low. So then it becomes very interesting what to do about this. And firstly, to do that, you need to understand what is the current position of Africa as a continent or as countries or even cities, African cities, to see what is their position within these changing flows of investment. Second question becomes very interesting to understand what actually attracts the investment. So what are the urban characteristics or location factors, as we call it, which are social or economic or environmental? Think of things like infrastructure or universities, highly educated people, new local technologies, ports, airports, etc., which could be factors which attract different types of investment. Cities need to understand how to match what they have to offer, let's say the supply side, to changing demand in the global economy or regional economies. And when you can match these two, then you will be able to try to develop a more resilient development, as long as these developments are also looking at social inclusiveness and taking into consideration environmental development. So to become more specific, what is very important is firstly to question yourself, what is the structure of investment in the world economy? So what does it actually look like? And how is it changing over time? Another question that's very important is to understand what is the actual changing position of any city within this network of investment. Then, even more particularly, to find out which investment sectors are the most interesting for any city, so that they can either develop these further or question themselves what kind of new investment in new sectors could they try to attract, and what would you need to do to actually pull this kind of FDI to these cities. Once you've decided which type of FDI is good for a resilient city or let's say a sustainable city, you then have to explore the cities that are good at this and find out which urban characteristics, so as I said, they can be social, economic and environmental, which of these factors are significant to the attraction of FDI, and also which are the most important. In this way, cities can use the capital that they have and invest it into the right types of characteristics and not waste their money on the wrong issues. So it's a very, you could say, econometric approach, but it could become very useful in urban policy development. In the following movie, I can make it more clear. What you actually see in this animation is roughly 200,000 investments to approximately 11,000 cities of the world, and this is within the period of 2003 until 2013. What you're actually seeing here is the actual clusters of investment according to their attraction. So for instance, as you would expect, Shanghai and places like London and New York will have very high peaks as they attract the most foreign investment. What you also see is regional differences. So you can see, as you would expect, North America and Europe and parts of Pacific Asia to be extremely dense in their attraction of foreign investment. But more importantly, when you look at regions like Africa, we can see that although there is traces of investment, we must consider that this is only 4% of all investment of the world. Another thing to know is of that 4%, most of it goes to countries like Nigeria and South Africa. So one important issue to consider for African development is how to develop the cities in a way that they become more connected to the global economic system. So it very importantly means we need to find ways to attract the right type of investment, which means being cautious of predatory investors and purely investors in the extractive industries, but how to start creating resilient cities with highly educated people, high quality infrastructures and amenities in such a way that you start attracting the types of investment which can lead to sustainable development. Now we're going to move from the animation to some more two-dimensional maps, but of exactly the same information. In this case, I'm only showing investments above 20 of the world, which reduces the number of locations. But what it does show you is the general strong concentrations of investment in the world economy. What is quite striking is that most of it still takes place in the northern hemisphere, and the southern hemisphere is still pretty much excluded. If we look at investment into Africa, we can see that there is quite a bit of investment, particularly to places like Johannesburg and Nairobi and Lagos. But what we also see is that there is not so much development in the inner parts of Africa, which might be explained by the fact that many of these countries are landlocked and have weak infrastructure. So this becomes very interesting to find out which statistical properties of these areas are either attracting the investment or deterring it, and what to do about it and how to change policy in such a way that you can start to pull the type of investment in that you need. So in the previous map, what we've seen is the flow of investment to cities around the world. And of course, many cities are recipients of foreign investment. In the following map, you see the actual investor cities. And what you see here is that there are a much more limited amount of cities which have the power to invest in others. So for instance, where Shanghai was very powerful as a receiver of investment, it is much weaker as an actual investor. In this case, you will see more the types of cities you can expect, like London, New York, and Paris, which are much more established cities, which have a longer trajectory of being strong, and that these cities actually still, to many degrees, control the economic system and the power of corporate investment. So what we've seen in the two maps before is simply aggregations of investment at city level. In the following map, it becomes much more interesting. Now we actually see the type of flows that are taking place between these origin and destination cities. So what is very striking in this image is that still most investment takes place in the northern hemisphere, and only some connections come down to the south. So we can see that Latin America is moderately connected to the northern economic system, and that parts of Pacific Asia and Southeast Asia are developing well. But what we also see is that Africa is still pretty limited in its connectivity to global economic flows. If we, in the next image, dig deeper into the data, then we actually can see that Africa does attract investment, but these investments are much more in smaller types of firm and also in less advanced sectors. Striking though, and contrary to what everyone normally thinks, the amount of investment coming from China to Africa is much more limited than we would expect. And to most people's surprise, maybe, the connectivity between Europe and Africa is still extremely strong. So this is very interesting to consider that the history between Africa and Europe still holds a legacy, which in some ways actually unfolds economic ties between these regions. Another interesting thing to see from this map is that, contrary to expectations that there is a lot of economic activity in the south between countries and regions of the south, the evidence shows that relations between, for instance, South America and Africa and Southeast Asia is still pretty much limited. So what we see in this graph is that, contrary to what people expect, that most investment is purely in the extractive industries or in things like mining, we actually see evidence here that the biggest sectors that attract investment are in things like transport, communications, financial services, renewable energy, and business services. So this shows that there's definitely a transition going on in the world and how Africa is attracting investment. In the next slide, we actually try to understand what urban characteristics determine the attraction of investment into Africa. And as I said before, you need to look at particular sectors of investment. So you need to look at investments in transport or biotech or renewable energy. But in general, the following indicators are shown. Most important is to develop very productive cities, so that explains what they call market size. The other side is there's a positive, significant relationship attracting investment to those cities or countries that have highly developed, knowledge-intensive industries. That means developing highly educated people who are interesting for foreign investors to create new services and products. Other important issues to consider are the development of roads and ports and transport. So how to create better quality infrastructures, which can be interesting to particular types of investment sector. One strong indicator, but negative, which comes out of many researches I've done, is the negative impact of corruption and crime, and generally the fact that many cities are not safe enough for investors to want to take the risk. Besides that, other important issues that have shown evidence are the fact that cities are sprawling too much. there has to be a stronger relationship between where people work and where people live. So trying to shorten the distance of travel, which means technically compact cities or much better connected urban systems. Many types of industries, especially the knowledge types, they also require attractive cities. So creating cities with attractive environments to live and work in, with the right type of amenities, and also to create high density cultural diversity, and how to integrate these programs together to make resilient urban programs. It's also very important that African cities and countries start to work together, in this sense thinking of regional cooperation between countries and cities in particular areas. So think of the ECOWAS region in West Africa, to how to strengthen alliances between these countries. Corruption is one of the biggest deterrents of foreign direct investment, and political instability and war are also not favorable for investors. So all in all, we have to try to reduce the risk for investors. Once we achieve that, we will be able to attract the type of investment that we need, but we also have to be very careful that we attract those investments that cities want. So the research is not only about trying to understand what statistically is important, but that we remain human beings and that we think about the type of investment we need. For instance, we do not want to maybe attract investors in chemical industries within the city, because this could have a destructive impact on the environment, especially the urban environment. So we need to look at the types of what they call green investment that cities might require, which are important for the development of jobs, types of investment which work better with local communities and create social inclusion, but also the types of investment which can actually boost environmental development. All in all, this research has been trying to show that there is big data out there which can be analyzed, and it can be connected with microdata at different city levels or regional levels. Connecting these data can inform us better on the types of policy that we need to create to become much more specific and accurate about the type of investment we need, and to actually use this kind of research as an important communication tool. So through these different visualization techniques, to make sure that local governments and other stakeholders get a very clear understanding of what they're discussing, and in that way be more informative to policy development. It's all about trying to connect that what happens within cities to that what happens between the cities. So as I started the presentation, it's the nexus between economic globalization and spatial urbanization, which can be researched, and with the aim and perspective to that way find resilient cities within resilient economic systems. Thank you.